Welcome to another edition of Grace Under Pressure, where my show focuses on what's too often dismissed as the soft stuff, the caring, the commitment we exert toward others. And when you do it from a leadership position, as you will definitely discover that my guest, Barbara Kellerman, is, and is a commentator on the topic, leadership is about bringing people together for common cause. Welcome, Barbara Kellerman.
Thank you, John. I am very glad to be here and to speak with you. Should be a good conversation.
Great. Well, first of all, as I have told Professor Kellerman, I am a big fan of her work. I've been reading her work for a couple of decades now, and she has been a seminal influence on me, and it is a big, big honor for me to have her on the show. So let me tell you a little bit about her. Professor Kellerman is a fellow at Harvard's Kennedy School Center for Public Leadership. She was the founding executive director of the center and a member of the Kennedy School faculty for 20 years. She's taught at a number of schools, and she has been all over the media. She's the author of many, many books. Well, the first book that I encountered her with was a book called Bad Leadership. Today, we're going to focus on maybe a sequel to that book called Leadership from Bad to Worse. Welcome, Barbara Kellerman.
Thank you again, John. I'm glad to be here.
Why your work stands out to me is that leadership, at least as I define it, is something that is aspirational. We want to do this, we are called to it, or we're put in positions of leadership, and we respond. You in my words, focus on the dark side of leadership, and I think that's, without being masochistic, I think that's very refreshing because there are two sides to the coin. So, why did you decide to focus on the negative outcomes of people in power?
Well, it's a great first question, John, because it gets to the issue of how do we define or think of the word leader or leadership. So I have argued that the leadership industry, which is about 50 years old, in other words, people have always been interested in leadership since the beginning, Confucius, Machiavelli, Plato, but only in the last 50 years or so has it become really a big money-making business. And I think in part because it's become a big money-making business, unlike Machiavelli and Confucius and Plato, we tend to act as if the word leader or leadership has the, the adjective in front of it, good. So when we take a leadership course, it's implicit that we're taking a course on how to be a good leader. I raised a question about that long ago. As you said, the book Bad Leadership came out literally 20 years ago. But even before that, I wrote a short essay called Hitler's Ghost, a Manifesto. And I raised the question of why, and I love your phrase, the dark side, which I use myself. Why are we fixating only on leaders who are, quote, good? Again, the definitions of good and bad, maybe we can get into those, but it doesn't make any sense to me. We just have to sort of look around and we see a world that has many, many, many good leaders and managers. But alas, it equally has many, many bad leaders and managers. And there's the problem. I am quite alone. I'm not entirely alone, but nearly entirely alone in my focus on bad leadership, which is not complete. I write a lot about good leadership and how to professionalize leadership, all kinds of things. But yes, my interest in bad leadership has been a running theme.
I am so glad to hear you say the leadership industry, because I often say, I don't use that term, but I recall my own example of the study of leadership. And I was educated by the Jesuits, both high school and graduate, I went to Georgetown. So, and I don't recall ever hearing the word leadership, nor do I recall the word leader other than as a head of state or something like that. But now, as you said, almost 50 years, I'll celebrate my 50th anniversary and from graduation this month. So you binged it. And now you're right, it is a fad. Not that leadership is a fad, but the way we teach it. And so that's why I think your work is so important. So now you write in your book, and you make it very clear because you focus on four key individuals that leaders don't intend to be bad. They end up that way. So what happens?
Well, again, I can't but return to the issue of how we define bad. So let's go to the very extreme example of Adolf Hitler. Virtually synonymous with bad to the point of being evil. So it's unlikely that Hitler thought of himself as bad. And of course, his close followers and countless Germans, especially in the 1930s, he became chancellor in 1933, thought of him as very good. So now let's pause for just one moment, John, on how we are defining bad and good. So the problem, I should say one of the problems with this kind of conversation, which by the way, I'm happy to hear you were taught by the Jesuits because they love digging deep, and this inevitably means digging beneath the surface. So one of the problems is that your bad might be my good. And we see this in the United States of America today, where, to take an obvious name, Donald Trump, lots of Americans, many Americans think he's a wonderful leader, the best president ever. And lots of Americans, many Americans, think he is a terrible leader, the worst president ever. So who's right here and who's wrong? How do we define good and bad? So in Bad Leadership, the book that came out 2 decades ago, and I've stuck with this ever since, I define bad as along 2 simple axes. One runs from ethical to unethical. So you're a good leader if you're ethical. And the other axis runs from effective to ineffective. So simply put, a good leader is simultaneously ethical and effective.
Absolutely. Now, I'm glad you cited these examples, and you mentioned the German people embracing him, and particularly the intelligentsia. Many of them are certainly the industrialists, and that gets into leaders who go on the dark side, if we will, are enabled. Tell us about the followership model.
Well, I could go on for a very long time about this. In essence, I never understand how the leadership industry, how people who think about leadership, who want to become leaders, are so quick and complete to omit the importance of the follower. So I think in terms of a system, the leadership system, which is very simple, but marginally more complex than fixating only on the person at the top. The leadership system, as I define it, has 3 parts, each of which is of equal importance. So first, the leader, who, however, is not any more important than his or her followers. In other words, you cannot have a leader without at least one follower. And third, again, of equal importance, is the context or contexts, plural, within which leaders and followers are situated. So to return to Hitler, you cannot understand Hitler without understanding the German people, his most ardent acolytes. You cannot understand either the leader or the follower without understanding the context that was Nazi Germany in the 1930s. Similarly for Donald Trump. So the followers, to me, are every bit as important as is the leader. And in fact, one of the books I wrote about bad leadership is really about bad followership, and it's called The Enablers.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you focus on enabling, because a leader can accomplish nothing without the followership. And while we like to say, oh, it's a good thing, and very often it is, it can go bad. And your model, as if you were walking through it, we have phase 1, which is onward and upward, the followers join in, number 2. And then you said the leader starts in, and this is where the unchecked behaviors, as you say, kick in. So they begin to cross the line from ethical to unethical. Am I correct in that?
Yes, you are. And yes, in leadership from bad to worse, I take the title quite literally, that even the worst leaders don't start at the worst end of the spectrum. It is a gradual process which I divide into 4 phases, and only if left entirely unchecked by someone or something do leaders progress through the 4 phases. And again, their bad followers progress with them through these same 4 phases. So you cannot, it's too cumbersome to title the book Leadership and Followership from Bad to Worse. So I call it Leadership from Bad to Worse, What Happens When Bad Festers. But it is really very much also about the other. You cannot, there's no such thing. It's like, it's not part of the English language to be able to lead it alone. So inevitably, a bad leader has at least one, and usually many, many more bad followers.
Okay. Now, you profile 2 executives in the book, one is which is Elizabeth Holmes of Theranos, and the other is Martin Winterkorn of VW. Theranos was a startup. VW obviously is a company that's been around for nearly 100 years. Although, as you point out, we're in this German cycle. It was started under the Nazi regime, but certainly it has a positive reputation today. But what happened with Martin Winterkorn?
Well, Martin Winterkorn presided over a period of Volkswagen's history, which was in some ways glorious because the company did brilliantly, but beneath its brilliant performance was an insidious fact, which is that it had installed regularly in most of its vehicles what came to be known either as a defeat device or a cheat device. This went on for about 8 years, for a very long time. Winterkorn knew about it, although he denied it. There's no way in hell that he could not have known about it. And a few key followers knew about it, none of whom spoke up, went public, went rogue. Everybody benefited because Volkswagen did brilliantly. It was a cheat device designed to convince consumers and government regulators that Volkswagen was singular in its ability to run vehicles without major pollution. So it was deceptive every which way. It went on for many years. Ultimately, Volkswagen was caught, and ultimately a few key people, including Martin Winterkorn, paid the piper, but some would argue the price they paid was not dear enough.
Now, when you look at Winterkorn and leaders like him, obviously from good to bad, and if you say it's clear that he did know it, it was the concept of the sense of hubris. I can get away with this. Is this because, I'm the head of VW, a global company? Is that what's going on psychologically, or what is your perception?
Well, I think it is. And for many years, Winterkorn was right. He did get away with it. The question is, and that's really underpins leadership from bad to worse, why do we, ordinary people, put up with it? Why do we, why do we tolerate bad leaders, bad managers? Why do we tolerate them in the workplace? We know that countless millions of Americans have bosses that they, for one or another reason, dislike, sometimes even despise. Bosses that are thoughtless, bosses that are mean, bosses that are callous, bosses that are inconsiderate, bosses that stress out those who work for them. Why do we not do anything about it? Why do we put up with leaders in the public sector as well as in the private one? Or for that matter, in the military and higher education. I just finished a series of 5 blog posts on what's happening on college campuses, what has happened to leadership and followership on college campuses. Why are we seeing campuses be disrupted this way? Is it about bad leadership? Is it about bad followership? Or is it a good thing that students are protesting? So these are the complexities that we struggle to unravel. But at the bottom, I think my question is, why does humankind forevermore put up with not address what I call the social disease of bad leadership. We address physical diseases, cancer and heart disease and AIDS, and we address mental or psychological diseases such as schizophrenia. We attack all of those, mental diseases, physical diseases, but we do not attack, we do not study, we do not think about what I call the social disease of bad leadership.
So toward that end, and jumping ahead, you provide at the end of your book a 12-step a 12-step cure or things to be watched for when it comes to leadership. So did you you raise some questions which are both individualistic. You say, why do I put up with a bad boss? Many people will say, they perceive I have no alternative because of my income, family, all that kind of stuff. But why does a populace put up with it? Well, that's a broader question, because are their values symbiotic? What conclusions did you come to, Barbara?
Yeah, it's a great question. I wish I could give you a single simple answer. The answer is we have individual reasons, personal and private reasons for going along with a bad boss. And I never want to make it seem easy to challenge a bad boss. I'm aware of the potential costs involved. I'm aware of the potential even risks involved. So I never want to make it seem easy, but I do want to get people to think about it. So the motivations on an individual level, for example, for putting up with a bad boss, I need the job. I want the salary. I have a family to support, or at least to contribute to. The motivations for putting up for bad leaders at the political level or in the world of politics can be quite different. They're often not about personal risk, but sometimes they are about personal gratification. I feel like I'm a member of a group that if I strongly support, say Biden or Trump or whoever, that's going to put me in a community of like-minded Democrats or Republicans. I stand personally to gain if I'm Senator Mitch McConnell, and it is widely known that a senator like he has personally strongly disliked Donald Trump ever since he came on the national scene. But he obviously concluded he was interested in making the Supreme Court very conservative. He was interested in being seen as and literally as one of the key leaders of the Republican Party. And he obviously concluded that despite his personal dislike for Trump, it was in his political and professional interest to continue to support him even after January 6th. So there are many people who are enablers and or simply supporters, members of Trump's base. Let's talk about Trump for a minute, who have various reasons for going along. And they range, as I said, from safety and security in an individual level to communal interest, to being part of a group, not wanting to be marginalized. And I do explore many of these reasons in the book. But we have, I wouldn't say they're good reasons for supporting bad leaders, but I would say they're understandable reasons. It's the human condition. And if anything, it's harder to work against a bad leader than to simply be a bystander and say, whatever, I've got my own life. I've got my own life to live.
Right. Well, also in your book, and it echoes a book I just finished by William Cohen about called Power Failure, the story of the rise and fall of General Electric.
Yeah.
And one of the themes in the book is the board went along with Jack Welch's plans and Jeff Immel's plans until it was too late. So, and I think that echoes a little bit, if I remember correctly, with Theranos. People on the board knew better, but they all went along. And that's people in the know who know better who are complicit. And that's an aspect of bad leadership too, is it not?
Oh my God, yes. I mean, there was an article in the Wall Street Journal about the board of trustees of Columbia University. Whether you agree with the journal or not, I'll simply echo their point, which indeed I wrote about this morning. The board seems to be kind of mute. They're letting the president navigate the campus unrest. They have not gone public. They have not, tried to rein in the president, at least not so far as we know. So yes, boards generally, certainly historically, have been, if you want to use this word, complicit in what the leader does, even if what the leader does, the CEO in this case, is bad. By the way, since you mentioned General Electric, I know the book, Cohen's book that you're talking about, but I cannot resist because I've written a lot about General Electric. It was the poster child for leadership training. They had a campus on Crotonville, which was dedicated. It was Jack Welch's particular pet. And to me, one of the ultimate ironies of the leadership industry is that the campus on Crotonville seemed unable even to properly teach, educate, train Jack Welch's successor, Jeff Immelt, who by every account was a bit of a disastrous failure precisely as a leader.
Great, good point. Now, delving as you do into the darker side of bad leadership, are you an optimist when it comes to leadership, Barbara, or what's your perspective?
You know, John, I always define myself as a realist, which means neither a pessimist nor an optimist. As I said at the start, I think there are countless good leaders and followers, people who are dedicated to improving life as we know it. On the other hand, I see very clearly that whether you're talking about within the United States of America or abroad, there are leaders all over the place, private sector, public sector, whom certainly by my standards of what is good and bad, and again, much of this is personal. You and I might not agree on who is good and who is bad. These are complicated issues, as I do not have to tell someone who was educated by Jesuits. But we need to take a stand. And in Leadership from Bad to Worse, I make very clear where I'm coming from. I make clear that I understand not every reader will agree with my values, my ideas, my opinions, but that's all we can do. We can just say where we're coming from, try to have some kind of minimal moral compass, and forge ahead.
Great. Well, I will say we are racing toward the end here, and I want to get you off because I know that you have a commitment. And is there a quick story on leadership, or excuse me, on the topic of grace you can share that relates to our conversation?
Well, fortunately, you gave me a few seconds, not minutes, but a few seconds to think about this. So I will tell one very brief story. There is a man about whom I wrote my doctoral dissertation. He was a leader of what at the time was West Germany. This was during the Cold War. And his name was Willy, or Willy in German, Brandt, B-R-A-N-D-T. And I have written a lot about apologies. In fact, I had an article years ago in the Harvard Business Review titled, When Should a Leader Apologize? So I'm very interested in the notion of somebody being accountable, somebody being responsible. Willy Brandt was actually not in Germany during World War II. Again, I'm returning to the German theme here, but it's one of the biggest single acts of grace that I can recall a leader performing. So he was actually in Norway and Sweden during World War II, having escaped the Nazis. But then he became Chancellor of West Germany, as I just said. And he was asked to go to Warsaw in Poland, obviously. And when he came to the monument, Warsaw Ghetto, he did not try to verbalize an apology on behalf of the German people for what had been done to some Poles and many Jews, obviously. Instead, he simply fell to his knees in silence. And I thought that physical act of contrition, even though he was not responsible, he was symbolic of his country, the silent act of falling to his knees in that spot at that moment in time during the Cold War, to me, said it all and was a singular and wonderful act of grace.
What a powerful story, and thank you. And the book is Leadership from Bad to Worse. It's available wherever bookstores are, as well as Amazon, and people can find you at your website, barbarakellerman.com, correct? So
it is correct. Thank you so much, John.
And with that, we'll go out and thank you, Professor Kellerman. It has been an honor for me. So
Great pleasure, John. Appreciate it.